thank you for inviting me to the session. I want to do a bit of introduction on myself before I go into the content. So my name is Ivy Kuo. I've been a digital citizen and a champion in the last 20 years. And so most recently, in the last couple of years, I tapped also into the ESG space. I've recently also taken up the role of East Asia Pacific ESG leader role. So this role is, I think, everything that we do. So it's ESG. And today, what I want to share with you is ESG and how does the role of this tool play in the ESG. And I think before I start, in the last 10 years that globally we're going to do a digital transformation. And I think in the next 10 years, a number of companies, a large portion of companies will be going through ESG transformation. And so today I want to cover two topics. One is ESG. What are the things that we are facing as we go through this ESG transformation? And what does it do for us? Why we as companies or as individuals need to think about ESG? And the second thing is, how does digital play a role in the next 10 years of ESG transformation? Like what Clive said, if you have any questions during my presentation, please feel free to put in the chat as it won't pop up. So I'll probably answer at the end of my session. So what ESG? I think, as you all might know, in the last 2 years, we've experienced the pandemic. And as a result of that, I think a lot of things came up, particularly the ESG transformation has accelerated, not just in Asia Pacific region, but globally. From the sort of the recent number of regulations that come out in the US, in Europe, and sort of strengthened by the COP26 most recently and end of last year. This has all sort of been a propeller to the ESG transformation, but why do we do it? And I think as we go forward, as there's a lot of disruptions, including technology, a lot, and COVID, etc., the trust issue has broken down. And I've spoken about the regulations that's been coming up. And what we as companies need to think about, why ESG plays a role in everything that we do. Ultimately, what ESG does is it provides a greater transparency for us to show to the companies, to the different stakeholder systems, which is wider than the investor communities compared to the past, right? So think of this as an extended disclosure in addition to your financial disclosure to the relevant parties to build greater trust and build sustainability. So I just say a lot about why we need to do this, but trust information, who are the stakeholders in this system that we need to have a better relationship, that we need to build trust. Here I've listed a couple of examples here. I think at the top is the board level comfort that we need to ensure that there's visibility for the board to make the right decisions to accurate and reliable information. So think of in the past, right? So when we present to the board or to the investor communities, all the different stakeholders listed here, we disclose financials, right? We disclose financials, and most people look at the returns. Going forward, having a sustainable operation, and we hear about a lot about sustainable operations, but what is it, right? It's about building transparencies in terms of how you manage risk as you operate a company. And that sits with many levers. So you think of ESG. E is environment, all the different topics that sits with environment. S is all with the people and the social impact, and G is with the governance. So how do you do that? And it is through the trusted data that you disclose to the board, to the investors, to the different stakeholders within your ecosystems. And that includes your consumers, right? That includes the different rating agencies, that includes your business partners. How do you create more trust, due transparencies, accountabilities, and credibilities to the different stakeholders? And why do people do it? I think there are a number of drivers, right? I mentioned regulatory requirement, and that has becoming a driving force for a number of different countries across the globe, particularly Asia Pacific. Now, what we're seeing is that in China, in Japan, in Taiwan, Singapore, New Zealand, even Australia, we've all seen a number of different regulations that's coming out, forcing companies to disclose selected area or ESG or decarbonization efforts in being a more responsible company. And as we run companies, one of the most important things at the top, I think, relating to financial is that a lot of people think of um, if you think of traditional way of investing, right? You look at the financials, like I mentioned, but going forward, you say that you're doing good in ESG. Who, why should we trust you, right? Why should we trust you? And I think that's very important. You say you're good. How do we verify that? And that's where the rating agencies comes in. Particularly, I think as there are different standards, which standards do I use? Who is looking at me to say that I'm operating in a well-mannered ESG, managing my risk, etc. So rating agency is, I think, in the recent years, much sort of visible sort of stakeholder system that's popped out. The reason why rating agency is very important is that when you say you're good, as investors trying to invest and to have a more green portfolio, they turn to rating agencies. Rating agencies looks at the company's disclosure on how they're operating, disclosing their operation, how they manage their risk, and they rate you. Now, what you disclose online, people look at you, right? And so how do they trust you? No, they don't trust you 100%. They only trust you about a third of what you tell them. So instead, with the digital transformation in the last 10 years, what happens is people are able to use big data to see if you are actually you're practicing what you're saying. And so rating agencies use about 60%, roughly 60% of the big data to evaluate your performance as well. So I'll give you an example. When you say, I treat my employee quite well, right? And so you win all these awards. And this is the actual case that we've experienced. And as it turns out, your former employees are, a lot of former employees of your companies are actually talking bad things about you online. Therefore, as rating agencies, they actually take into account of what is being said in the World Wide Web and discredit you on that rating element. So that's why this ecosystem isn't just more about the different stakeholders, but also about what all the people that you come encounter with. So as sustainability is changing how the business are operating, well, a lot of people are saying, okay, so in order to be compliant, right? So there are two different types of mindset for companies. One is there's a regulation, there's a law I must follow. The other type of companies actually sees the value in terms of how I can leverage ESG or sustainability as a value creation process. How can I align my ESG to my growth strategy? And in the long term, then it becomes a part of my DNA to drive more growth. And so if you think about everything ESG, when you think about trust issue, which I just said, because you're disclosing how you're managing your risk, how you identify risk, how you manage your risk for the long-term growth. But at the same time, I think ultimately everybody you deal with can see the value in you, right? I've listed a number of different the different stakeholders and all that stuff. But ultimately, I think it's a value creation process. And one of the mindset a lot of people are thinking of right now is ESG is this big investment area, right? I join a lot of money there, but do I actually see return? So in the Wall Street, a number of financial institutions have been tracking this for the last 20 years. And the average return of a company that does good ESG practice versus a company that does not do ESG at all, I think the rate of return is about 10 to 20% more for a good ESG performing company. And so I think that's something that is that has been proven through time that ESG is very important, and in the long term, it actually creates value. As we're in Asia Pacific, I want to start with China. About a year ago, PwC China, Hong Kong, and World Economic Forum conducted a survey for all the large companies in China to understand the ESG landscape and where the challenges, where people are in terms of maturity. And the funny thing we discover is that there are different maturity stage, but the issues and the challenges that different company faces are extremely similar. So I'm just going to name a few. The most frequent question that we've encountered, and this is, for me, this is very interesting, is where should I start, right? And that's partially because there are a number of different standards. If you look at ESG reporting, you have, if you sit in Hong Kong, China, there's Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and then you have GRI, you have GRASP, you have, all these different acronyms. Where do I start, right? And that's typically the first question. And secondly is, I've heard about ESG reporting. I've heard about climate change. I've heard about, decarbonization, supply chain, etc., sustainable finance, TCFD, all that kind of stuff. What are those things, and where do you recommend I start, right? And the third thing is, and this is quite interesting. I think this probably has been asked. A number of you will probably have that question in your head as well. We've heard about ESG report, right? Most recent. We've heard about sustainability report. We've heard about CSR. How are they different, right? And I think from 50 years ago, the companies have started to be asked by the society to be more responsible. But of recent years, ESG actually bring those storytelling, how good I am, how I'm contributing to society, into a more measurable KPI set with specific topic associated with it. Hence, giving companies specific goals to work towards to, right? And then there are the questions about how does this impact my supply chain? Because we all know that supply chain is a big part of ESG in that it actually covers scope 3. And how do I manage? I'm going to use a couple of examples to stress the importance of supply chain. Anybody who has been exposed to supply chain knows that people in your procurement, in your supply chain process, your vendors, your suppliers, if you're a big company, anything that happens downstream, upstream, that impacts you in your brand equity, right? And so if you think about a number of, I'm not going to name names, the big retails in the last 10 years, right? Mobile phones, shoes, etc., brands, anything that happens, it actually impacts their brand equity in terms of share price. So a lot of what we do at ESG is actually about managing not just your own risk, but you as leaders, how do you manage upstream and downstream to ensure that you have managed all your risk. And so that's where the supply chain comes in. And then, once people figure out where to start, they're like, okay, so how do we support our people? Because this is quite a new topic. And how do we do upskilling? Do we need how do we get our people to change their mindset to start thinking about it? How do we leverage digital? Where do we need to invest? What are the stakeholders that we need to communicate with to let them know that we need to that we're doing ESG? And how do we communicate to the different stakeholders? Those are sort of the common questions. So, and the short answer is there is not a right answer on how to start. You can start from the top where you say, okay, I know I need to do this for the long run. So I want to start big, right? I need to align it with my strategy. So how does it map to what I'm currently doing? So that's one approach. The second approach that we're seeing, a lot of people are being conservative because I just don't know what value it brings me. So I'll start with something like, ESG reporting. which allows me to understand a bit of my baseline on where I am and sort of a high level understanding of what I need to do. And then that comes to our third categories of players, which is say, okay, I know what I want to do. I want to do decarbonization because that is going with the national directive that what we're doing here in China, right? I need to do climate change. I need to do this. I need to do a lot of I need to have a green factory. I need to have a green supply chain because the law is asking us to disclose, or my downstream, my clients asking me to disclose, right? And so I need to start working on those as my prerogative, as my priority. And so therefore, as you look into the ESG landscape, starting points may not be the same, and varies depends on your client, your situation, and where you want to get to, and what your objectives are. That's sort of my first section on the challenges and benefits of ESG. Given I have very short time, I'm sorry, this might be a bit sort of very high level. Very happy to answer specific questions. The second part of my presentation is focused on how does this all help us in this whole ESG transformation? And remember, I just talked about how ESG is meant to help us in terms of the transparency of helping not just the external, but also the internal people, how we're operating, where the risks are, how we manage the risk, and how we turn that risk maybe into an opportunity area to help us grow. So what is the role of ESG in that? Before I get into the benefit, right? You see a number of different benefits. The basis of this whole, and this is something that a lot of companies are struggling with globally, not just in Asia Pacific, is data. We all know that digital is an enabler. In order for anything to work in the digital age, you need to have good data, right? So there's a saying that garbage in, garbage out. So having that clear structure of data governance, data consulting, to enable us into building that right process, collecting that right data, allows us to really benefit from the digital element of the ESG transformation. Now, before I get into this, again, I want to also say that ESG is very different in that ESG covers across all the functions you can think of in an organization, right? So you think if a company has factories, right? Yeah, it cuts into factory operational data, HR data set, right? And all the admin data, right? If you use paper cup in the office, it cuts into the travel expenses of your personnel. So there's a lot of that electricity that we all consume for the heat or the ACs. They all plays a role. So that data transparency data quality is very, very important. And that's the number one struggle globally to make this happen. And so the benefit of digital, there are a couple things I want to say is once you have that data, right, what it allows you is to make a smarter decision in terms of uncovering a lot of things which traditionally has been hidden in operation. That's probably not a priority. We usually look at data. The most clean data that we all know is the frontline sales, right? Because it's the revenue, etc. But throughout the entire operation, a lot of data are not connected, and so they're hidden. As we go into this sort of ESG era, a lot of data cleansing through this exercise will allow you to uncover a lot of sort of in terms of the data that you never think that wasn't that clean. I'll give an example in that. So we all know I travel a lot for work. So as our first sort of digital exercise for calculating the PwC's emission, Hong Kong, China, is that we look into people's travel, not in addition to the buildings and electricities and all that. So I was under the assumption that everything I expense, I need to sort of, apply for approval, everything, there's an expense system associated with that. Easy peasy, right? As it turns out, it's not very simple. So I was looking at the company's flight data and thinking I can just API plug it out and then calculate my emission and I'm done. The reality is that's not the accurate data. So the accurate data actually sits with the company that's charging us for the flights. Because anything I book, if I don't use it, it sits in there. It doesn't get charged, but the ticket's still in there. But the system would see it as, I already took the flight. So the emission would be wrong. So there's a lot of that sort of unclean data, and which has not been most of our systems currently used are not built to track emissions, for example. And so a lot of mindsets are very different when the systems are designed. So we need to start changing the process of collecting the right data or choosing the right data to use for ESG transformation to meet the purpose or the objective of disclosure. And the second thing is when we do sort of ESG, now a lot of companies are asking for audit trail, right? From ESG reporting, you need to do assurance. From disclosing your carbon, you need to do assurance. So traditionally, when we do this, one of the things that we don't, so this is more like auditing part, right? You say you're good, so how do we know if you're good, if you're disclosing the right data? In order to make yourself more trustworthy, a number of different countries have asked for third-party assurance. That means when you submit something, how do you leave a trail that allows you to be audited? And this is where digital comes in, allows you to have that kind of proof and submit that into the system for a trail process to make sure that your data is valid. And this is when I say ESG, ESG is a big topic, right? So this covers more than just ESG. And when you have all those data that is transparent, it allows you to make better decisions. I'll give you an example. Carbon emission. I think this is more of a hot topic at the moment, so I'm going to use carbon emission as a lot of my examples. As we go into decarbonization for the next 10 years or next 15, 20 years, the first step is knowing where you are. So think of this as a physical checkup, right? So there's a lot of sort of carbon emission tools out there. So how do you know which one to use, etc.? And that depends on what your objective is. So when you go to a health checkup, I know I do every year. So every couple of years, I find this very expensive package that scans me inside out, and do all this cleansing, etc. So it spills out a very clear sort of health checkup data that tells me where I have problems, where I'm quite good health-wise. So think of data in the same aspect, is that the more you give to the digital tool, the more it allows you to have a visibility into your health situation. And that allows you to make better decisions and choose your pathway forward. If you have high-level data, that allows you general direction, and obviously approach is different, whether you want to do a big transformation or whether you want to take a baby step. If I'm overweight, then do I want to just change my diet and then not eating donuts, or do I want to take a complete change of my lifestyle and start exercising, etc.? So the choice is yours. And second thing is the efficiency level that's associated with it. This tool allows you to put a lot of things that was manually to start with into an automated format. That means collecting data that didn't exist before is actually a lot of work. And because a lot of process wasn't in place before, a lot of things are being done manually. Okay. We interviewed a company, Consumer Electronics. They went to this exercise for 2 years to transform their company, because when they started collecting data for ESG, what they realized is actually those are not the typical data I would collect from my operation. So I need to build a new process or re-engineer some of my process so I can make this data collection a lot easier. And actually what I benefit from it is there's a lot of sort of things I didn't know about myself that I can actually improve. So in a way, it increases my efficiency. Now, a consumer electronics company took 2 years. One of my banking clients took 3 years. going to do a data transformation just for ESG to ensure that they get the right data so they can increase their efficiency and for better decision making. But it all sits with the data quality. The benefits actually, so I spoke with some of the benefits on what it allows to do, but ultimately, I think it sits with the four quadrants that you're seeing here. Always have the right process. Make sure that the data collection process, etc., is embedded in your normal working routine. We all know technology project often fails because it is not in your normal routine, right? And changing process, etc. If it's outside your normal work routine, people ignore it, and I think that's very important. Collecting the right data, I think I said enough about that. Define what data you need to collect, the data definition, data collection, data process, verification, etc., and traceability. And understand what you're going to report so you can collect the right data is also very important. And this is something that I think a lot of people need help on. ESG is a bit of a new topic. The reporting, like I said, there's a lot of different framework. And every framework actually look at data a little bit different. So you need to fix on what you need to report. If you're reporting for a particular framework, how they are looking at that data. So the methodology and the definitions are very different and calculation as well. So know what you want to report and your objective and how you build KPIs to make sure that people understand the entire process. And ultimately, it's about embedding the technology. And I think this is the most easy part. With the advancement of technology, there's a lot of AI element that can help you to automate, not just automate, but make sure that the data collection process is smooth and with a built-in intelligence that allows you to sort of check for any human errors, etc., make intelligent alerts, and improve your existing system. Think of anything, right? This is what beyond the Discord. I did this workshop before, and this is for a supply chain of a company. And I remember during the workshop, the first thing I said was, before we start this workshop, think of if you can think of what a ideal situation, right? The future of your job, what it would be like, right? Just imagine that. That would make your life a lot easier. Can you write that down? And so people start writing things down. But then I realized that a lot of people, when they think about what is possible, they're already taking into account of the technology that they know of. But technology has moved so fast. There's a lot of new technologies that we're not aware of. And I've been recently been involved in this project and getting into metaverse and all kind of stuff. Nothing is impossible. Like my most recent sort of found was a hologram, okay, that I like. And so I think of what is possible, right? Think of a perfect scenario and then use technology to enable you to make that happen. And so I think that's very important in terms of how you think about that. It is an enabler, okay? It is not, don't think about, oh, what technology should I use? No, think about what you want your workplace to feel like, to how you want to work, and then use digital to help you to achieve that. And that's no different for ESG or any other topic. And I think that's a very important mindset to have. And lastly, I know I'm running out of time, is that I want to do a bit of marketing and promotion. So my team has sort of built different tools. Feel free to the websites listed below to use the different tools to help us track digital emissions for sort of sustainability investments or for ESG reporting. But I think ultimately, the visual board helps you in that as real time. It helps you to make better decisions as you implement any initiative. And I think that's the real value associated with that. You're able to see anything that you do, any initiative that you put in place. Are they working? You're able to track that real time. do the fancy dashboards, do the fancy analysis. And the more clean your data is, the more granularity your data is, the better the output. And so I guess my final words to this is it's not about the technology because the technology exists. The word digital actually a bigger part sits with the data. And so make sure you have the right structure, the right data governance, and it will work. So that concludes my presentation for the day.